So guys, what's going on? I hope you guys are well. Hope you guys are staying safe. So guys, Canelo Alvarez, not Canelo Alvarez. I can't get my words out there. What's going on? Oh yeah, Tim Bradley has said that he feels the only guy that can beat Canelo Alvarez right now is Andre Ward. He goes, Andre Ward hasn't lost since 12 years of age. Andre Ward is a special fighter, we know that. Definitely a great fighter. But when I look down Andre Ward's resume, you know, I know he beat Kovalev, which was a great win. I don't see anybody there on Canelo's level from a boxing IQ. Even Kovalev was a great fighter. I don't think he had the kind of boxing skills and he had the ability of a Canelo and the ability to adjust. And a guy that lived the life. I don't think Kovalev lived the life like Canelo, although Kovalev was a formidable light heavyweight. And I actually thought Kovalev beat Ward the first time. And the second time, obviously, Ward, you know, went to his body a lot more, weakened him. And, you know, Kovalev, for me, was kind of on the slide. And Andre Ward took advantage of that. Not to also give Ward credit. Ward was kind of at the end of his career. Because after that second Kovalev fight, he didn't fight again. So I felt like Ward was obviously on the way out as well. But now there is talk about Canelo Ward, even though I don't think Canelo's really talked about it. And but the boxing people within boxing are starting to talk about it, you know, the media and stuff. And Tim Bradley basically said that the only way this fight would happen is if Canelo calls out Ward. Because if Canelo calls out Ward, then that might reignite someone like Ward to come back. Otherwise, I don't think it's possible that this fight happens. Is Canelo really the type of guy that's going to call out Andre Ward? Not really, because normally you call out a guy because you need him, or he's a big name, or, you know, he does something for your legacy. Like Alexander Usyk, although he was a better fighter than Tony Bellew, I feel like he needed Tony Bellew to get that big fight, that big payday, to get that recognition here in the UK. So I think he called out Tony Bellew because he knew what that fight would do for his profile. Canelo's not really in that position. Canelo's a superstar. He doesn't really need Andre Ward. So is he going to be calling out a guy that's been retired? I don't think that's in Canelo's makeup, if I'm honest with you. Unless their team comes up with a strategy to call Ward out. I don't really think, because again, what people will say if Canelo beats Ward, oh, he beat another guy that was old on the way out. Or he came out of retirement. So what does that really do for Canelo? Would Canelo get more respect and credit beating Beterbiev than beating Ward? I know Tim Bradley said that. Imagine what that would do for Canelo's legacy if he was to beat Andre Ward. I don't think it does anything. Because I don't think Canelo would get credit if he beats Andre Ward. At all. Because people will say Andre Ward was retired and Canelo dragged the man out of retirement. I don't think Canelo gets any credit for this. I think Canelo would be in a lose-lose situation. Because if Andre Ward comes back and beats him, which if Andre Ward is anything what he was in the past, there's a good chance he can, right? And I think that would harm Canelo's legacy. People will say, oh, he got beat by a guy that was 4 years into retirement. Because Ward's still not that old. I think Ward's probably 36, 37. Although I don't think it would be a great thing for Ward to come back right now at the age of 36, 37. Because I don't think he would beat Canelo. I think Canelo's in his prime. He's too active. He's still fresh enough. He's a vicious puncher. He's big and strong. I think that would be a very hard fight. And also, he's a guy with a very high boxing IQ. Like Ward. Ward's got a very high boxing IQ, but Ward's older now. He hasn't fought. He's inactive. His reflexes won't be what they were. So for me, that would be a very dangerous fight for Andre Ward. I rate Andre Ward. I think Andre Ward's a great fighter, no doubt. But I think it would be a very, very dangerous fight. At this point in Andre Ward's career, I think it would be a fight where, you know, it could be kind of risky. So I don't know whether Andre Ward would want that fight now. Like I said, maybe if Canelo talks a lot, like in his next fight against Plant, and ends up talking a little bit of smack or something, and Ward might get like that fire back in his belly and say, you know what, I want to come back and beat this guy. Also, Andre Ward never really got a huge, I know his probably biggest fight was against Kovalev, But again, I don't really look at that as a super fight. It should have been, but I don't. When you look at the way it's promoted, the pay-per-view buys it did, it wasn't a super fight. This would be a super fight. And unfortunately for Andre Ward, he was never really involved in a massive super fight throughout his career. This would be a super fight. So this is why I think Andre Ward may be attracted to the fight. Just because when you look at Andre Ward's career, he had big fights, no doubt. But he never really had those massive super fights that we're going to talk in 20, 25 years' time. This could be that. I think Andre Ward always craved that big, major, breakout, huge fight, which I don't ever think he got. Kovalev was the closest he came, and I don't think that fight was that big, because I don't think Kovalev was a huge superstar. A great fighter, no doubt. Kovalev was a great light heavyweight, and Ward was daring to be great by moving up a weight and fighting Kovalev. But I just don't think it was a super fight. I think this would be a super fight because of the fact that Canelo Alvarez, for me, is a more well-rounded fighter than Kovalev and a bigger star than Kovalev. This would be a huge fight. A huge, huge fight for Andre Ward. And also, it'd be his biggest payday by a mile as well. I think it'd be more than anything he's been, that he's got before. Obviously, you're fighting the biggest star in the sport. And Canelo Alvarez, we know, makes a lot of money in his fight, for his fight. So, Ward would get a huge payday. So it would definitely be attractive to Andre Ward because of all those things that I just mentioned. The fact that it'd be a super fight, the fact that it would be his biggest payday and a huge fight, and it'd be against a guy that would enhance his legacy. If Andre Ward, see, for me, this fight does a lot more for Andre Ward than it does for Canelo, because it would enhance his legacy, because Andre Ward would, in my opinion, be beating a guy that is better than anyone he's beat. Now, Kovalev, for me, would beat Prime Canelo, but that's because Kovalev's bigger than Canelo. But in terms of better fighter and more round complete fighter, Canelo's the better fighter. Canelo's the best guy on his resume in terms of what he's achieved and how great he is. And that would be a hard fight for Ward as well, like the Kovalev one was. And the fact that Ward has been out of the ring for 4 years, so it'd be like he's beating the best pound-for-pound fighter right now, being 4 years out of the ring, almost half a decade out of the ring. So that would be some feat if Ward can come back and do it. But I'm not sure whether Ward would come back. And I don't think it would be a wise thing. I think it would be better for Ward to keep doing what he's doing. I think Canelo would beat him right now. That's just my honest opinion. I know Tim Bradley said he feels that Ward would beat Canelo. I disagree. I think Canelo would beat Ward right now. I think maybe in Ward's prime, I think it would be a great fight. But I think you'd have to edge, or you have to say Ward would beat Canelo, just because of the fact that Ward was very skilled and he's also bigger than Canelo. So that would make it tough. However, even in his prime, I think Canelo because Canelo for me is more skilled than anyone he's faced at 168 by not even close. I think at 168, Canelo would be the best name or the best fighter that he would get in the ring with. And the guys that he's been in the ring with at 168, I don't think it would be close. I think Canelo would beat everybody that Andre Ward beat in just as good fashion, I think. I think Canelo is also in a league of his own, like Andre Ward was. So that would be a very, very good fight. Very, very good fight. Right now, like I said, I think you'd have to favour Canelo just because of the inactivity of Ward. And I know Tim Bradley said that, Ward hasn't lost since 12. But again, like I said, he's not faced many fighters like Canelo or as good as Canelo from 12-year onwards. So, and like I said, he's been inactive for 4 years. So Andre Ward had a great resume and he beat everybody at 168 pounds. But like I said, he really lacked that huge super fight, which he didn't really get. He didn't really get in his career. And I think Kovalev was the closest that it came. And this is why I think Andre Ward would be attractive. This is why Andre Ward at the time was willing to go up to one heavyweight. He was talking about Anthony Joshua. Because Andre Ward for me it wasn't about the money, because I think Andre Ward made a lot of money from the 2 Kovalev fights. It was more about he was attracted to the super fights, the huge mega fights. Ward wanted those mega fights. And unfortunately, there was no one really around. See, now there would be. If Ward was around now, there's Beterbiev, right? Who people would think could beat him. There's now Canelo at 168, who people would probably think could have a chance of beating him. And also Canelo's a huge star. Now, again, Beterbiev isn't a superstar like Canelo. Canelo's a superstar. So obviously the fact that that fight would be a huge fight financially, from a profile point of view, reputation, everything, and what Canelo's achieved. That fight would be a huge fight for Andre Ward. So it would make a lot more sense for Andre Ward to fight someone like Canelo. And also, Beterbiev is naturally bigger than Ward. Beterbiev's huge. So I actually think that Ward, if Canelo calls out Ward, I reckon we could get a fight. I just don't think Canelo will call out Ward, because like I said, normally when a guy calls somebody out, it's because they need that guy. Canelo doesn't need Ward. If you look at it, if you look at Canelo fighting Ward, Ward is the one that's going to benefit. Ward is probably going to get his biggest payday that he's ever had. It's probably going to be the best name on his resume. Also for Canelo, if he beats Ward, people will say, well, you're dragging somebody out of retirement. He doesn't really gain a lot. Whereas Ward, for me, gains a lot more. Now, I know Bradley said that, imagine what that would do for Canelo's legacy, beating a guy that hasn't lost since 12. But the fact is, he's been retired 4 years. We're not talking about a Ward in his prime. So a lot of people are going to give him criticism by saying you're fighting an old guy. You're fighting another guy that was on his way out. Or in this case, you're fighting another guy. You're fighting a guy was retired for 4 years. Do you understand where I'm coming from? So I don't think Canelo will get the credit or the respect if he fights and beats a Ward. And that's why I don't know whether Canelo will be that interested. I think Canelo would fight Ward in a heartbeat. And if he calls Ward out, I think Ward would also be attracted to the fight because of the reasons I just mentioned. But does that fight, what would you rather see? Canelo fight Beterbiev or Canelo fight Andre Ward? I think when you look at it from a legacy standpoint right now, you'd have to say Beterbiev, because like I said, Ward's been out the ring for 4 years. That's too long. That's too long. And we don't know what he's been doing during that period. Andre Ward always looks in great shape. He still looks in good fighting shape. And I think he takes care of himself. You can definitely tell he takes care of himself. But again, I don't know whether that fight for me, I don't know. I don't think that really fight does anything for Canelo. I think if there's anyone that's going to gain from that fight, it's Andre Ward, because Andre Ward would be coming back, and if he beats Canelo, he'd be beating a pound-for-pound guy in his prime. Whereas if Canelo beats Ward, he'd be beating a guy that, yeah, was once a pound-for-pound best, but beating a guy that's 4 years into retirement. So you tell me whether you think Canelo gains anything from that fight. I don't personally think he does. But I'd love to know your opinion. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Let me know what you think. And guys, remember to please like, share, subscribe to my channel. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.